now, Justin Trudeau has basically threatened BC. He said either BC will bring in its own carbon tax, or if it doesn't, the Trudeau government will force one from Ottawa. By removing that threat, British Columbians can elect a common sense provincial government that can axe the tax here in BC. The alternative is what Trudeau and the NDP are both proposing now, which is that they will quadruple the tax. They want to raise it. This is just the beginning. They want to quadruple the tax up to 61 cents a litre.
Pierre Poilievre is following up on Premier Andrew Furey's call for an emergency meeting on the carbon tax, writing a letter of his own to the Prime Minister that says, in part, the Liberal Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador has written to you requesting an emergency meeting to discuss your carbon tax. I am requesting that within 6 weeks of receiving this letter, you convene an emergency meeting of Canada's 14 First Ministers. Here's how the Prime Minister is responding today.
Various provinces have put forward plans over time to try and meet that federal backstop. Indeed, Quebec and British Columbia have their own pricing systems that match the ambition of the federal plan, so they go ahead with their own. Other provinces can design a price on pollution that meets that federal level. We're always there to work with them.
Meet with the premiers on the carbon tax. Let's bring back the front bench. Brian Gallant, Lisa Raitt, Tom Mulcair, and Rob Benzie. Tom, I'll start with you. Should the Prime Minister make that meeting?
No. And I think it's pretty easy for him to say no at this stage. It's already coming into force. He knows that it's a bear trap being set for him by Poilievre, but I have to say, in terms of political communications, the Conservatives under Poilievre are so fast because they just jumped on that opportunity provided by Furey of Newfoundland Labrador and said, well, while we're at it, let's have a big emergency meeting. And the minute that Trudeau says, well, that's not going to take place, he gets to complain about that for another couple of weeks. The bit at the beginning where Poilievre tried to say that somehow Trudeau was responsible for blackmailing British Columbia into having its carbon tax. This just in, that carbon tax was there long before Justin Trudeau was ever elected Prime Minister of Canada. It is such a stretch. Does he think that that'll work in other provinces? Maybe. Does he think that there's anybody in BC who believes what he just said? I doubt it, but if he does, he's incredibly naive. Look, Quebec was excluded because of the Western Climate Initiative, a cap and trade system with California. It's worked. It's producing the result. Ontario had the same deal, could have had no carbon tax, but instead, Doug Ford said, let's have the carbon tax because I don't like this Western Climate Initiative because it was the Liberals who were there before me that brought it in. That's the reality of this thing. It's across Canada right now. We're finally starting to do something to respect the rights of future generations, putting in a tax that will make sure that we reduce our carbon footprint, we reduce our greenhouse gases, which is something we're obliged to do internationally. Poilievre's having his innings right now. He's doing very, very well. But I think that longer term, when people in Alberta realize that it's a $1,800 check that they're getting, in Saskatchewan it's a $1,500 check, people will start to say, hold it, we're getting this stuff back for most families. And I think then the temperature will start to go down. It's certainly not by having an emergency meeting when the new tax is already in force, Vassy.
I mean, to be fair to Premier Furey, Brian, the letter that he wrote, the Prime Minister wasn't like, let's do away with the tax and do nothing and just cross our fingers that we meet the climate targets. Like, he is not in disagreement with the targets, but he is sort of communicating, I think, a perspective that he's not alone in, even among other premiers, which is there a way to substitute the consumer side of the carbon tax? Because people certainly do feel it's very punitive, despite the communications from the government about it not actually being a tax and being a rebate. Not the whole industrial price on carbon, which accounts by 2030, I think, for something like 30% of the reductions, but the smaller consumer side, which accounts for 8 to 9%.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the premiers are taking that kind of posture, saying, look, they're trying to balance the idea that by saying that they would want the federal government to address their price on pollution, they are also trying to say, yeah, but we believe in climate change. Not only do we believe in it, we know that we have to address it, and they're using the argument to try to balance it out to say, essentially, let's find other ways that we can do it. And to your point, for sure. I mean, the consumer portion and the consumer contribution, if you will, to emissions is a percentage. Now, I'm not speaking on behalf of the federal government. I'm assuming their arguments is, well, their arguments are that if we're going to be able to reduce emissions and hit the targets, we're going to have sort of all the contributions to our emissions be addressed. There has to be some type of program in place. So I'm assuming that's one of their arguments. The other thing, again, I was at the table when this was negotiated. It certainly was very clear that the Prime Minister and the federal government wanted to be able to say that from coast to coast to coast, there is a price on carbon pollution in Canada. And that applies to sort of all. I'm not sure as to if that's a personal sort of goal for the Prime Minister and the government. I don't know if that's, again, going back to the percentages and just saying, well, if we're going to do this and have a balanced approach, we need to be able to drop all of the kind of contributors to pollution, or if it's some type of sort of international play where they want to be able to go to other countries and say, we're stepping up, and again, everybody is contributing. So it certainly was pretty adamant when we were around the table that was crucial. And I think the only thing I'll add is like thinking to back then, that certainly their positioning was, look, if you don't do this, we're going to come and do the backstop, it was called, right? We're going to come in and apply the federal backstop. I'm not sure they would have thought that as many provinces would have applied the backstop. And now I think it's a way for some of the premiers and provinces to say, hey, it's not our tax, it's not our price on carbon pollution, it's the federal government, so, put your anger towards them.
I think also, I think it might be fair to say, even the politics, the calculation, Lisa, around the politics at that meeting would have been different because of the affordability context than it is now. To Tom's point, maybe that context changes in a few years too. I don't know.
Well, you know what? Politics is a moment in time, but I can say that I appreciate what Pierre Poilievre's doing. I think what we call it is stirring the pot, and I quite enjoy it. I'm looking forward to this first ministers' meeting, and I hope it does happen, and I hope you guys televise it from top to bottom, but I know that won't happen. But what I would say is that, look, there are two arguments. The first one that Tom made with respect to the importance of the carbon tax to our goals and to making sure we get to net zero. It's a very principled argument, and I think it's the one that needs to be made and landed. And people are either going to accept it or they're not going to accept it. And we're seeing them weigh their own personal wealth or their own personal well-being against that tax right now. And it's a tough call. The second part is the redistribution of income argument, which is you're getting more back than what you're paying in. Here's the problem with that argument. The problem is that Canadians will say to you, I would rather I keep my money in the first place, okay? I don't need you to give me back more money. I don't trust what you do with the money when you have it. I want to keep it for myself. And that's why the polling that PCO has done that I've read about recently, saying to Canadians, what do you want? They say, we want tax cuts, which is going to be the big ask going into the budget. It's not just going to be about how big the deficit is why aren't you making my life easier by reducing my taxes?
Last word to you, Rob, because Doug Ford also kind of once again made some new comments today on the federal carbon tax, essentially saying you're going to lose the election if it's still in place.
Yeah, I mean, Premier Ford was almost pleading with the Prime Minister to back off of what he had done. It was we called it a do or die situation for him. For Trudeau. And Ford is very concerned about that because it's bad for Doug Ford politically if Pierre Poilievre becomes the Prime Minister of Canada, because we know that Ontarians prefer one party in power federally and another party in power provincially. So if Mr. Poilievre wins in October 2025, there's a good chance that Bonnie Crombie or Marit Stiles becomes Premier the following year. Or a better chance. And I think that's something that's in the back of Mr. Ford's mind, aside from his long-standing opposition to carbon taxes. That being said, he is increasing Ontario's carbon tax on industrial tax on January 1st to $80 a ton of carbon. So Ontario has an industrial carbon tax, just as Canada will have an industrial carbon tax if and when Poilievre becomes Prime Minister. I don't think that anyone's going to get rid of industrial taxes. It's the consumer taxes that seem to be driving people so crazy right now.
Yeah, that's the focus of the debate for sure. I'll leave our conversation there. Thank you so much to our front bench. Appreciate it. Brian Gallant, Lisa Raitt, Tom Mulcair, and Rob Benzie.